Hello, everyone. Welcome to TCAF 2021. My name is Faduma, and I'm from the programming team at TCAF. Before we begin, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are in a territory that was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to share and care for the land. We also acknowledge that this area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. TCAF makes this acknowledgement as a reminder that we are all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to the land and each other. This acknowledgement is a touchstone in our process of thinking through what it means to live and work on colonized land and as an expression of solidarity with our Indigenous siblings. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities in Toronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. Thank you everyone for coming. Just a note, if you want to turn on closed captioning, you can turn it on by clicking on the screen at the bottom right corner of your screen. Welcome everyone to Kids Like Me. In this panel, we get to discuss the genuine representation of BIPOC storytellers and characters. What happens when BIPOC characters and their stories are centered in comics? And how does the existence of these narratives impact young BIPOC readers? Today, we are joined by Jen Storm, Yehudi Mercado, Jen Haines, and our awesome moderator, Jay Torres. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will leave the floor open to Jay, who will officially start this awesome panel for us. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you, Fatima. Does everybody hear me okay? We're good? Awesome. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this very special panel. I'm really excited. I've been waiting all week for this. As Fatima said, we are joined by three very accomplished individuals here, and I'm going to introduce them to you all right now. Pardon me. So first up, our first panelist is a writer whose first novel, Deadly Loyalties, was published when she was only 14. I don't even know what I was doing when I was 14. Her first graphic novel was published in 2016, and that was called Firestarters. And she's also contributed stories to comic book anthologies like Moonshot, Volume 3, and the groundbreaking This Place, 150 Years Retold. Comic fans, please welcome to the panel, Jen Storm. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
How you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for asking.
Well, thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, David A. Robertson had to cancel, but fortunately, we were able to get Jen to come join us today. Jen, can you tell everybody where you are zooming in from?
I am zooming in from Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Right on. All right. So thank you for joining us, and I'm really, really excited to be chatting with you today. Our next panelist is a writer, artist, animator, podcaster, and art director whose graphic novels include Cat Ninja, Fun World, and one of my kids' favorites, Sci-Fu. His newest book is called Chunky, and it is not named after me, but I think I can relate. And it's coming out in June. Comic fans, please welcome to the panel, Yehudi Mercado.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh man, my pleasure. I'm a fan. Where are you zooming in from today?
I'm in Burbank, California.
Oh, lucky you. And our last panelist, last but not least, is the owner of the Dragon chain of comic shops. Yes, it is a chain officially with 3 shops strong in Ontario. She's also the president of Comics Bro, the comic retailer business association. She's the curator of the Dragon Prize for Kids Comics of the Joe Shuster Awards. And she's also an educator and the bass for the award-winning a cappella group, the Bluebirds. So maybe she'll sing something for us. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jen Haines.
Hello. I will not be singing for you. Sorry.
Oh,
Jen, come on.
We can harmonize.
There's more than enough to talk about. You don't need to hear me sing.
There's 4 of us. You know, we can tell us what parts to sing, and maybe
I'll take the baritone.
Well, that's the most challenging part. So.
See, I have no idea what those things are. I love music, but I have no idea what you people are talking about. Anyway, I want to get started. Before we get into the stories for kids, I want to talk a little bit about our stories and where we're all coming from. So let's talk about where we grew up, maybe where we went to school, what the environment was like. what the demographics were. So for example, myself, I grew up in Montreal, Quebec, predominantly French city, but I lived in a predominantly English suburb and predominantly white. Went to a very small grade school, 80 kids, I think it was, very small high school, maybe 150 kids. And again, predominantly white. Maybe 10 to 15% of the people were people of color, and half of them were related to me. So that's kind of the way it worked out. Yehudi, what about yourself? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Mexico City, but then moved to the United States at like I was 3 years old. So I primarily grew up in Houston, Texas. And in Houston, like I'm a Mexican Jew. Where we grew up, there wasn't a lot of Jewish people or even a lot of Latinos, really. It was primarily white, like school district in Northwest Houston. And actually my family was one of the first to start a synagogue called Jewish Community North around that area. And my father's an architect, and he actually designed the synagogue, and designed the building.
Wow.
But yeah, I remember like in junior high, I was literally the only Jewish person in the entire school, and I had to give a presentation on what Hanukkah was like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was born in the Philippines. And of course, anytime we had any kind of, celebration of other, holidays or whatever, I was the go-to guy.
Yeah.
For the longest time. What about you, Jen Storm?
Well, I'm originally from Couchiching, which is First Nation in Northern Ontario.
Like Aurelia area, right?
The which?
Aurelia area, like up Northwest Ontario.
I don't know, really, like by Rainy Lake. It's like right on the border of Fort Francis, like right on the border of the American, and kind of by Manitoba as well. That's where all my family is from. And my parents both moved together here to Winnipeg to go to school. And I was born very soon after that. And in my junior high years, I spent in a suburb as well, close to the university where my mom worked for her entire professional career. And it was a predominantly white suburb, but there was a lot of foster homes nearby. And because of that, there was a lot of Indigenous students, and we all kind of like grouped together.
Right.
And it was actually the age gap I was in when I started actually writing my first story, because I was actually writing it when I was like 12, 13. And I remember like in school, we were reading like Harry Potter or like Outsiders or like those books that are, entertaining and stuff. But I remember feeling very disconnected from those stories because I was like, I don't relate to the same feelings. And I remember feeling like I came from a home that was very suburban. Like my mom did very well for herself. I never worried about if there was going to be food in the fridge, feelings like that. But all of my friends, because we all kind of gravitated to one another, they had those worries and they didn't feel connected to their families. They were dealing with foster care and like all these very heavy things that I wanted to make sense of. And that's actually what kind of got me to write, was that experience of seeing these two different worlds collided in this one school.
Right.
So that was kind of the atmosphere I was in, and what kind of really prompted me to, I guess, create something for me and my friends. That was, I don't know, I don't think I set out to be relatable, but it was just kind of something that happened with what I was doing at the time. I was grounded all the time. That's also a big caveat of how I started writing young. When people are like, how did you have the discipline? I didn't have it. It was enforced upon me.
I had no choice.
I had no choice.
Right. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that, about relatability and representation, all that kind of stuff. Maybe even grounding.
Yeah.
Jen Haines, I know you grew up in a multiracial family. So what was your experience like?
So I grew up in Oakville, which is a super suburban, high-end town. It's not even a town, it's a city, but they prefer to be called a town. Like that's where I grew up. It's officially called the town of Oakville, just outside of Toronto. It's about an hour outside of Toronto. And I went to an Anglican private school from kindergarten to grade 13, the same school. And I lived right around the corner from it. I lived just in a very, very white pocket. My dad is an immigrant from England, and my mom is an immigrant from Jamaica. And I'm obviously white presenting, so I fit in no problem, except I remember one incident that happened with a girl in my class. There was one Black girl in my class, and like she knew that my mom was Jamaican, and she like picked on me in grade 6 for like some reason, that my mom was Jamaican, and therefore like started saying all these stereotypes about Jamaicans. And so that was like kind of the one time that I kind of like really had my heritage like presented to other people. I really feel like my mom always kind of like hid who she was. She definitely wasn't overly Black presenting, so I think she really like tried to fit in with everyone else. So we didn't have a lot of Jamaican elements to our life growing up. Like we had certain foods that we would eat that were different than other people, but it was almost like this kind of like novelty that was kind of off to the side. And I kind of wish that she had had more boldness to implement that and to bring more of it into our lives, because I feel like I kind of like, I wish that I knew more about that side of my family for sure. Yeah, it was she definitely kept it a little bit quiet, that's for sure.
Right. So we're gonna get into that a bit more, that sort of situation in our lives and other kids' lives. But I'm curious. So in these various environments that we all grew up in, what was your experience with comic books and graphic novels, or just books in general? What kind of access did you have? Where did you get your reading material? Maybe even talk about your first experience with a comic or a graphic novel.
Yeah, growing up, my mom was a teacher. She was a teacher, so like we always had access to libraries, and even when she would go to grad school, we could tag along with her to the University of Houston, and so like spent a lot of time in libraries. But I didn't really get into graphic novel. I mean, I guess I read comic books, like the superhero comic books growing up, but it was stuff like Beverly Cleary books. Like those are the ones I feel like, that and like Encyclopedia Brown, like those kinds of books. Like I sort of like dove into immediately, but then quickly, when I got into like the Sunday funnies, like the Sunday comics, and that's when it was really like, oh, here's my kind of sense of humor, my kind of style. And so I would read Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes, and then I'd try to draw my own Garfield, had my own Calvin and Hobbes, and Bloom County. Like that was a huge one for me as a kid. And yeah, just really like that format, and like trying to sort of recreate that format. Like I knew I couldn't like draw like, the superhero style, but I could draw like the cartoony, funny stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Jen Storm?
My comic experience growing up was very supermarket. Like I'd be walking in the aisle, and I remember like when I was back home, like Kuching, I'd spend the summers with my grandmother, and we'd go to the supermarket. I remember like she'd always pick up like Archie comics for me.
Right.
But there wasn't really much else for books there, and I think she knew it would absorb my attention, because this was like obviously before iPads and an internet. So she'd buy me like all these little Archie comics because they're easy to read, and I was into them. Right. I was also a fan of Calvin and Hobbes too. I remember having like stacks of books, and before I started even writing comics, I remember feeling like, I don't know if I could do graphic novels because I didn't grow up with that same attraction to them. And then when I started thinking about it, I'm like, wait a minute, yes, you did. Like you were into like Archie and stuff, but I just didn't see them because I was thinking like Marvel, and I was thinking like superheroes and those storylines that even to this day, like to be completely honest, is not my thing. Like when I see graphic novels I like, it's like, the darker things. Like I used to like Creepshow.
Sure, yeah.
If you remember that one, yeah, like all the Stephen King.
Yeah.
When he got into graphic novels for a bit there, I was reading all that stuff because it just made it so much easier to absorb a creepy story. You know what I mean? And I didn't even realize it. So yeah, I'd say that was my comic introduction, and kind of what I veered to.
Yeah, it's interesting that, we're talking about BIPOC stories for kids and BIPOC people and characters, which of course come with some stereotyping, but there's also the stereotype of what comics are supposed to be, right? A lot of people think comics are just Marvel, DC, or whatever superheroes. Speaking of which, Jennifer, Haines, Jenna.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the outlier in my immediate family in that I'm the person who reads comics. Like no one else in my family had any interest in comics. So my first exposure was actually visiting my cousins in England. I would read like the English annuals, like the Beano and stuff like that, that had comics in them. And then I sort of gravitated again to like Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes. And so it wasn't until I was like 17 and I was visiting the local comic shop looking for like sci-fi magazines when comics started catching my eye. And it was like Batman animated series got me into comics, I would say. And so I was reading like some DC stuff. And then one day I picked up this copy of Strangers in Paradise and it was like, oh, wait, there are other comics out there. There are comics like that reflect life that like this is amazing. There are these comics out there for every taste. And so while these like superhero stories like gave me this certain warm fuzzy feeling, Strangers in Paradise gave me this real sense of that this was the thing I had been looking for, to where I felt like I was more reflected, where my personality was on those pages. So yeah, that whole idea of like seeing yourself, like I think the first issue of Strangers I picked up, there was a line of dialogue in it that I was just like floored by, because I was like, it's like Terry Moore can see me, like what is happening right now? That idea of like being able to find your reflection in books and just feel like it's okay to be you, because you're seen there by somebody else as somebody important to write a story about.
Yeah, that's huge, like being seen. And it's funny because growing up, I was a big Marvel and DC superhero fan. I particularly love any kind of superhero teams as a kid. And this was, I'm older than all you guys, so this was during the time where you could actually get comics from your corner store. And, I didn't even know what a comic shop was until I think I was in high school at least. But anyway, so I would pick up these comics and, I love them, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, whatever. But again, predominantly Caucasian heroes. But every now and then you would get like a guest superhero, guest star, guest member of color from some other comic or other world. And I kind of have I'm kind of torn because, back in the day, anytime any of these guys showed up, it was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like, this is great. And I couldn't tell you why at the time, right? It's just, it was just different. And I loved it. But looking back, we had a lot of really stereotypical characterizations, and some of them are borderline racist. And, like black characters all had black in front of their name: Black Goliath, Black Panther, Black Lightning. I don't even know what Black Lightning is. And all the Asian characters, there are very few of them that were on the page, all knew martial arts or had a sword and ninja weapons. And that any indigenous person, dear God, like they always had fur or animal skin.
The full headdress.
Yeah, right. Like the wolf thing or whatever. But I confess, I loved them. I did. Did you guys ever watch Super Friends growing up? I don't know if that was a thing. So for those of you who don't know, Super Friends is like a cartoon from the 70s and 80s, I guess. And it's basically the Justice League before the Justice League cartoon. And again, predominantly white. It's Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman. But at some point they brought in these like 4 or 5 quote unquote ethnic characters. But they were such stereotypes. So the Native American was called Apache Chief.
Right.
And his superpower was to grow big like Giant Man. But his magic word, or whatever you want to call it, to turn giant was Inukshuk, which has no, like, we're talking north and west, south, groups of people that probably never met. It's just, I don't know. And then like the one Asian guy was called Samurai. Of course he was called Samurai, but he couldn't carry a sword, so they gave him wind powers. And then the Mexican guy was called El Dorado.
Oh yeah.
It's like naming the Chinese guy Shangri-La, right?
Right, yeah.
Really, I don't understand. And
I've heard of that city. Yeah.
And the curious thing about this is they were all bare-chested, and bare-armed, but nobody else in the team. Well, okay, Wonder Woman and Robin, but I guess that's kind of different. But all the adult males in the Justice League all had full costumes and whatever. But anyway, so my point is, I didn't understand back then why they were so appealing to me, regardless of how ridiculous they are. So when you guys were growing up, I mean, did you look for people who looked like you? I mean, could you even explain that? Or was it just like, okay, I just like whoever it is that comes
Yeah,
along?
I think X-Men kind of tapped into that feeling. Like, I mean, even seeing like Storm like on the covers, like you just knew it was like something different. And then like Nightcrawler, like you didn't know what ethnicity he was. He was just blue, you know, like I feel like gravitating towards X-Men might have fulfilled that sort of like, oh, here are the others of the superhero universe. And even they had issues of like, you know, go away mutants, we don't want you any more mutants. Like a lot of it echoed like what I would see from learning about the Holocaust and like
Civil
how Jews
rights
were
and that
treated.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, the thing that I really gravitated towards was the Teen Titans, especially the Wolfman Perez stuff. And that is, you know, part of the reason I gravitated so strongly towards it is because it's a story about outsiders. It's a story about characters who don't fit in, who are questioning themselves and whether who they are is valid enough to function in the world that they live in. And, you know, I think that, you know, while they're not, you know, ethnic characters per se, while they don't look like they are of a particular race. I mean, Starfire obviously is an alien, and you know, Beast Boy is green, but
from the green peoples, yes.
There's a metaphor there that's relatable in that same way for BIPOC readers. That, you know, this idea of searching for that identity, searching for that way to exist and to feel like comfortable in any environment that they're placed in. And so I think, like for me, I think fundamentally, I think we all do search for that, for figuring out who we are and how we fit into the world. It's easier when you're white presenting.
Yeah. so let's get off the superhero thing and let's talk about BIPOC characters or stories, whether it's graphic novels or comic books, in other media. I'm seeing in the chat people are saying, oh, there needs to be more representation about this or that. So what other books or graphic novels have you read, past, present, something you see coming down the line? And please feel free to talk about your own books that you think, you know, children, BIPOC kids, and their curators, parents and librarians, et cetera, should be looking at. Definitely not the Super Friends.
Yeah, should I go? Or
sure, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, growing up, other graphic novels with BIPOC characters didn't really exist, but like now I feel like we're starting to see that more and more. Even though like you see those charts and it's like maybe 2% is like Latinx, like it's still like terrible representation. But yeah, that's why when I started doing comics, and it's been like 11 years now, like, you know, I started in video games and animation, and I would pitch TV shows with these like Mexican characters and then never see any like traction at all. And so then that's when I sort of turned all those pitches into graphic novels. And so my first book was Buffalo Speedway. I self-published. It's about pizza delivery drivers, but it's like really about like race in America. Like, and then my next one that was published was called Pantalones, Texas. And it was like Mexican kids in a tiny Texas town and how they always get in trouble from the law. And it was just stuff like I would never see anywhere else. It was sort of like, okay, if no one else is going to do it, I'll do it. And that's sort of what I've been doing ever since, is sort of like just like always have a person of color be the star, or, you know, really like you know, show that representation. And that's what Chunky's coming out soon. And that's literally a memoir about my childhood, like growing up as a Mexican Jew in Houston.
Interesting. I actually was going to talk to you about that, or ask you about that. So I see that in your work, the stuff that I've seen, I mean, there's a lot that you pull from Mexican culture and Mexican pop culture or American pop culture, stuff that you're into, things from your family, things from your life, but it's all fantastic. It's all
there's fantastical elements. Yeah.
Right. Science fiction and superhero elements, but with Chunky, it looks like a little bit. I mean, there's a character who's like the conscience, I guess, of the.
Yeah, he's the imaginary mascot. So he's not the imaginary friend, but he's like the imaginary mascot that cheers on Hootie, who's me. Like,
right.
Yeah, I think like I always like tend to like gravitate towards that magical realism and like have some sort of magical element within my books. It can't be just straight. Like I always got to sprinkle in the magic a little bit. Yeah.
And what about you, Jen Star? I know that you've done graphic novels and short stories in the comic form. Is it important to you to have characters that look like you, that come from your background? And
sorry, was there an end to that?
No, I was just going to say, like, how true or realistic do you feel that has to be?
Well, I feel like, sorry, I'm just getting my words together about it. I feel like there's a bit of responsibility as an Indigenous woman to use what platforms I have to bring voice and representation to other Indigenous women. And it's kind of something that it's easy for me to relate to. It's easy for me to obviously have that experience. But growing up, that didn't exist. And and I kind of feel like I could have maybe seeked them out. And I feel like seeking out those stories, to me, like Indigenous stories, was very difficult. I think the first book I got was In Search of April Raintree. It wasn't prescribed to me, like it wasn't part of the school curriculum, but actually one of my best friends was like, you have to read this book. And it was like obviously a heart-wrenching book. I'm not sure. I feel like a lot of people have read it, but it's like a very, very strong book about foster care, about abuse, about like a lot of terrible, hard situations, residential school. But I wanted it so much because of the representation that it had. But I was thinking like, do I just love breaking my heart? But it was what I gravitated towards was I'm like, wow, somebody's putting into words what I'm seeing and like explaining it to me. Because in my 13-year-old head, I'm like, why are we in the same environment but have such different experiences in life? How is this a thing? And it's kind of cool that stories can take these huge concepts, these heavy, heavy things, and kind of like put them out on the ground for everybody and just be like, relate to things in ways that are through other characters that may or may not be real. It could be fiction. And that's kind of what I set out to do as a now adult. Like in my book, Firestarters, I don't think, like I have a copy of it here, but it's this book here. And it's actually a story that takes place in a community that blames Indigenous students for an arson and deals with racism, deals with reconciliation, deals with the justice system and how different cultures approach things differently. And just kind of taking a big idea like reconciliation. I think it's carried a lot of weight over the past few years. It's carried a lot of political connotation. And I think when it comes down to it, people are like, what do we do with reconciliation? It seems like such a big, heavy thing. Like, how do I partake in that? And that's kind of the jobs I think I've taken on now, is to just kind of dissect that through stories and characters and representation, right? Same with the 150 years retold. We are trying to share a narrative that just didn't exist. Like, yeah, we've heard of arson. Yeah, we've heard of like Canada's history over the past 150 years, but we haven't heard it from the perspective of Indigenous peoples and how they were experienced the same history. And that other perspective just can really like complete a story for people, because we've all heard the other side. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry if I kind of like went off.
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay. So Jen Haines, given all of that, like my question to you is, how do we effectively curate these stories and put them in the hands of readers, BIPOC readers in particular, but just anybody in general, their parents, their teachers, their guardians, and so on? You're a retailer.
Yeah, I know. So I mean, I've been doing retail for a long time, and I've seen a lot of shifts in the market. And over the last decade, one of the biggest shifts has been a growth in the kids market, and having there be graphic novels for kids that are actually, written with kids in mind for a wide range of ages, which is amazing. And it's been equally amazing to watch that sector diversify over time. There's still a lot of books where we're just inserting diversity in order to sort of check a box and say, okay, well, now one of these characters in this book is Black or Latina, and that now makes the book diverse. Well, that doesn't really address the issues. It's been really great to see so many books starting to come out now that are actually being diverse and representing what it means to be Black, what it means to be Latino, what it means to be queer, to go on a tangent off of what our main topic is. But, like New Kid is by Jerry Craft is an amazing book that really like legitimately talks about the experience, and not in this like heavy-handed way where it's sort of like, here's the experience, learn what's happening. It's told in this like incredibly relatable and engaging way, so that any kid reading it would not only enjoy it, but also, get an understanding what it's really like for that character to be, coming from a Black community, going into this like white predominant private school and having to navigate, his feeling of being an outsider, but also that feeling of being an outsider now at home as well, where he's like the kid going to the private school. It's fantastic. And I think like books like that, Stargazing also does a great job of like actually representing what it's like. Haven, which is a book from Lion Forge, just an incredible book that I think is just having characters be themselves and not just colored differently. You know what I mean? Right. Like actually bringing in the elements of what it means to be that person, to have that background, to grow up in those communities, to in whichever community that is that they're growing up in, but actually bringing a full character with them and not just that the colorist has changed their skin tone. Like that's the shift that I'm seeing.
I feel like what, for lack of a better word, what's trending in kids' graphic novels tends to be sort of the biographical, autobiographical, diary style books. So I think that's a perfect vehicle for this kind of thing. And we're seeing some great results, I think, in that. And I mean, Yehudi's tapped into that, for example, and I've done a little bit of that. So do you think that maybe we should be leaning towards that more, and to kind of push the stories and the own voices movement by actually tapping into our own stories, not just creating characters and like you said, coloring them digitally?
Yeah, I do think that that's a great way to get the stories out. But I think there are also other choices that can be made regarding like hiring people who come from these backgrounds, BIPOC creators, to do work in more mainstream books. So Nubia is an amazing example of this, a book out by DC just recently, which is a YA book, but which my 9-year-old read, which after reading it, I was like, wait, maybe that wasn't a great idea. But it has so many great themes in it that help us to frame our discussion about what it means to be Black and what it means to go through a number of different experiences based not only on skin color, but also on gender. I think that having those authentic stories, it doesn't necessarily need to be an autobio or a fiction story. Those authentic stories can take place in any genre, in any sort of book, like the Witch Boys series from Scholastic. Again, another amazing example of what, being an authentic person in those books. Like those are authentic characters who are bringing this like world of experience, this world of their own experience with bias and with hatred upon them. Like it's having these stories where it's like, you are different and that's okay, and embrace it, and here are the challenges, and here's how we can maybe overcome them, but it's not going to be a perfect solution. There's a lot more of it coming out, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and I feel like with my stuff, I want to make more palatable comedies. So it's like it's not just the tragedy, it's not just the sort of sad stuff. I'm giving the other side of like oh, look, anybody can enjoy the jokes, and you'll get them even more if you're of color. Like, you know,
yeah, like a great example of the sort of approach you're talking about, Yehudi, is American-Born Chinese by Gene Yang, which like tackles racism head on, but it's freaking hilarious.
Yeah.
And it has, you know, a realistic element to it about a guy dealing with his kind of stereotypical Chinese cousin, but then it weaves the story or the myth of the Monkey King into it, and there's a cool twist in the end. But at the end of it, you know, you kind of learn a little bit about not only Chinese culture, but just the stuff that Chinese people have dealt with, particularly in Southern California, where he grew up. So I think that, you know, the balance of the bio and the comedy and the fantastical is a kind of a good way to approach it. But I also, you know, Jen Storm, I feel like a lot of the Indigenous stories that I've read kind of, they first want to deal with the tragedies and the dark history, which I think is super important. Like, so many people don't know these stories, right? But do you feel that maybe at some, it's going to take some time, obviously, reconciliation is not going to happen overnight, but do you feel like at some point you can get to the point where we're going to see, you know, for lack of a better word, the Indigenous Avengers, whatever that team's going to be called, and they're not all bare-chested, and, you know, is that the goal?
I think it's the goal. Like, people do want the full representation, and I think there was a bit of a pendulum swing too, right? Because for so long there's people that are saying like, it was so long ago, like, get over it, and like that whole narrative, politically speaking. And so then there's a lot of residential school survivors that are like, I am still alive. Like, that was not that long ago. Like, my kids, like my grandparents went to residential school. Like, it is still something that affects our lives. And like, that trickles down into our experience today. Like, you know what I mean? So it's something that I feel like people needed to put out there for that reason. And now I think we're also coming to the realization that there's more room for more Indigenous voices. And I think that's like something to speak to, is that like, I don't think it's necessarily all of us that are ready for that. I think it's just the way the market realizes that other stories are interesting. Like, the stories we're all picking up to read, it's not because we feel a moral obligation to understand, you know, this, that, or whatever part of history. It's just that like, this story sounds interesting. It's different from my experience. That's why I want to read it. Like, I read a ton of books that are just for like interest's sake, right? Like, we all bring that unique perspective. We all bring unique characters and like all these things, and that's what we're all doing. And I think that's kind of the goal. And then like, on an academic level, regarding like your question, is like, I think there's a lot of trauma exhaustion from a lot of Indigenous youth. It's like, we were like, my era, like when I was a kid, we were kind of more seen as like a past tense thing. Like, the Indians were in the textbook and they helped the white people settle by voluntarily moving. And it's like, no, we didn't. Like, and it's all like, you know, we're helpful, or like, move out of the way. And like, you know what I mean? Those kind of historical things where they're basically like, well, natives don't really exist anymore because they just became part of society. And it's like, well, we weren't stuck in time. Like, we evolve, our culture diverses, and like, we also deal with all these other historical components like residential school, where we had a lot of things taken away that we can't get back, like all those terrible things. But at the same time, like, we have a lot of funny stories too. We have a lot of history that I think is kind of portrayed now because of like, you know, all that stuff you were talking about earlier. Like, a lot of our stories are residential school heavy. A lot of our stories are very like trying to fight stereotypes. We're trying, like, it feels like we're in this uphill battle of like shedding this weight, so to speak. And I think that's tiring, like, you know what I mean, to always feel like all of our stories are us being traumatized. So I think it's coming around now where we're like, okay, there's a lot of stories like that have that, but we also have a lot of stories that are fun and stuff. And I think like, I'm trying to think of an example that I read recently, like obviously Eden Robinson. I'm sure everyone like Trickster.
Yeah, the Tricksters.
Like,
yeah,
and the Monkey Beach. Like she's kind of got that Stephen King vibe, which I love because I'm like a horror kind of person. Like I love that aspect. Like even when it comes to comics, like I like the dark and the like psychological things. And even in terms of like stuff that we're all writing now, right? Like we're just trying to kind of expand our representation to just being like that human interesting experience, like all of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, regardless of if you're trying to tell something historical or something fun, it all begins with story, and that's important, right? I'm being signaled that we have about 20 minutes left, so we're going to open the floor to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please type it up in the chat, and I'm going to have a look through it and give you guys a second there to take a drink and catch your breath while we wait for the questions here. It's funny because I was just going over the notes for this panel and bookmarking all sorts of books that I wanted to look into and stuff that I wanted to read, and it just got out of control. Like and please don't tell anybody about this, but my Amazon wish list is just huge. I just use it as a list. I don't spend all my money at Amazon. It's just growing, which is, I think it's terrific. I feel like I blink and all of a sudden this whole slew of graphic novels that should be interesting to me showed up. And it's funny because David A. Robertson was supposed to be part of this panel. And I discovered, I thought maybe he had written 2 or 3 graphic novels, but like he has a series of 8. There's a series of 8 graphic novels about Indigenous history and historical figures that I'd never heard of. So I was just like, wow, that's fantastic. So I don't see any questions. Oh wait, here, sorry. I have one from Sunny Stubbs. Oh, I love that name. And they say, hi, I'm a teacher and I am trying to write down the books you are discussing. Okay, I get it. As fast as you can. Do you have a list of GNs you can recommend for my classroom? Can you tell me where one is? Also, is there a way my students can access and watch a recording of this panel? So first, second part of the question first. Yes, Sunny, this is being recorded. And I think Pip or Fatima, if they could come on for a second and let us know. I believe it's going to be on YouTube for about a month. And you'll be able to share that link for a certain amount of time. And then it gets archived. And I'm sure if you approach them even after that time, they'll be able to provide you a link. But please don't quote me. Jen, Haines, do you have a list going by any chance of recommended reads? I mean, it would be huge, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yes. And I mean, I do a lot of work with schools and libraries and working on, I'll go in and like consult and help put books into a collection. And usually it's the guidance of the librarian about what the school is focused on. I don't necessarily have a like written down list of books, but I mean, I will drop into the chat the books that I mentioned.
I would recommend.
I don't have anything written down.
I was going to say I would, for starters, maybe the list of Dragon Prize nominees. Hype, just a little bit of hype there for you, Jen.
Thanks.
I think it's a good start. I mean, I'm not saying it's the definitive list, but it's a pretty good start, right, for kids comics.
Jared Rosellia, who does the Moon Bear or with the Red Panda and Moon Bear.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a whole list. I'll drop it in the chat.
Oh, cool.
Of
Very
Latinx.
Cool. Love that book. That is an awesome book.
Yeah, he's great about like just like here's all the Latinx comics people I know and recommend.
Yeah, so there's the link there. Yehudi just dropped the link in the and I feel like Jen Storm, it's Portage Press, right? That you work with? Am I getting that?
Yeah, Portage and Main Press.
Portage.
Yeah. They have a
French pronunciation.
Portage.
Portage.
Yeah, they have like a ton of Indigenous writers that are contributing to graphic novels. And even as you were saying earlier, like David Robertson's series, it's like graphic novels are such a unique and great way of giving kids history in a very easily digestible way. So there's a lot of those resources there through Portage and Main Press, or like their sub headline is like High Water Press, and that they house a lot of the Indigenous stories. And they have children's stories from like young to high school. So, I mean, I don't know what grades you're teaching, but they have age ranges and they have like teachers' guides and all that stuff.
So what are you working on now, Jen? You have any, Jen Storm, any new graphic novels or comics in the near future?
I do. I just finished a first draft that we're going to produce into a graphic novel, I believe. So I just have to finish drafting it up. And it is a story about a young girl, an Indigenous girl, who's dealing with pride and identity and all the different themes of that and how they kind of orchestrate into her life and her relationship with her parents. I'm really excited about it. I love it. It's very
sorry, did you say it was going to be a graphic novel or a novel?
Yeah, a graphic novel. I'm also working on a novel draft as well. So
very cool. Very cool. And so
in my novel one, so I just want to talk about it because I'm so excited. It's about Wendigos, because that's like my thing.
Oh,
and even in the Canada 150, like my story is about a Wendigo, a female Wendigo. And I just really wanted to write that story again as like an adult, from an adult perspective. So I am. So now it's going to be like a novel. And that's
very cool.
Right now.
Nice. I was just pointing to this cover behind me of How to Spot a Sasquatch, because it's about a female Sasquatch. Yehudi, I know that you have something you want to share with us, and I'm really keen to see. And you wanted to screen share too and show us some art?
Oh, yeah. Here, let me screen share.
And incidentally, for those of you who are interested, there are links to High Water Press, and Jen put a list of titles in the chat right now.
Yeah, so here's Chunky, which comes out in June.
Yes.
And it's about me and my struggles with weight as a child. I had an operation as a kid where a partial lung removal, so I only have one lung.
Wow.
So that sort of kicks off the story of like me needing to lose weight because of my lung issue.
Wow.
And my father is very athletic, and it was very tough to grow up in his shadow of being like an amazing athlete. So it's all about me trying out for sports and the disastrous results. But I sort of invent this imaginary mascot named Chunky that sort of like roots me on and shows me the way. But yeah.
Very cool. That looks terrific. I mean, all your stuff looks terrific.
Yeah, this was a very different book for me because normally it's like aliens and robots and blowing up planets and
Right.
But and this is just like sort of low stakes. Like, will a fat kid get a trophy? Like,
I don't know about that. That's not low stakes to me.
Yeah,
that sounds great. And this is coming out June
22nd.
June 22nd, right?
Yeah, HarperCollins, Harper Alley. And I'm working on book 2, Chunky 2 right now. Oh. And that sort of deals like, first book was like my weight and like dealing with that. Second one is me being a disciplinary problem, like in school, like for some reason, like, I was always in detention, like suspended, like, but I was a good kid. Like I never got in fights. I never like smoked or drank or like, I was a good kid. It was just because I was like a sarcastic kid that teachers like,
smart
really,
aleck.
Like like really just responded negatively towards me. So it's about me going to detention and then getting sent to summer camp, and like I get sent to like a Jewish summer camp, and I finally sort of like meet my people.
I was going to say that doesn't sound like a punishment to me, but so this is set in Texas where you grew up, right?
Yeah. And cool. The summer camp was in Waco, Texas. Like
which we know about from different things.
Yeah.
Fatima, our program coordinator, has a question, and it is: what are your favorite coming of age books or graphic novels that center around BIPOC characters now and then? If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind getting started and hyping. And here we go again, superhero books. I can't say enough how great the Ms. Marvel comic is over at Marvel.
Yeah.
Not only for the fact that they've reinvented a superhero into this. She's basically an icon now, right? Kamala Khan. She's basically an icon now. We've got a TV show coming out. It's just like such a huge step towards BIPOC representation in quote unquote mainstream comics. And it is a coming of age story because it is about a I think she's a preteen when she first gets her powers, and then goes through all, all that typical, Peter Parker stuff that Kitty Pryde went through. It's not exactly an original plot, but in terms of who the character is and where she comes from, she's like a Muslim character. I think she's the first Muslim superhero we ever saw on this side of the water. I think, yeah. So I can't say enough about that series and various collections of graphic novels. Any other coming of age books that you guys?
There's one about to come out, Reptile, by Terry Blass, right? Blass. Mm-hmm. Okay. He's sort of a new Latino. I mean, he's existed in the Marvel universe. It's the kid that like can transform into dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But it's sort of never been like highlighted at all. And now he's going to get his own like run, and I'm excited for that one. That one comes out, I think, in August. Yeah, or July. Yeah.
I do feel like DC and Marvel are making some really good choices right now. They're really like stepping into the ring and taking a real stance and saying like, these are not just supposed to be all white characters. Like, let's actually do something about it. And that's amazing.
Yeah, it was scary with the Comicsgate backlash. Like you felt like, oh, maybe they were going to like cave to that pressure. Yeah. But like, I feel like they said, no, we're going to triple down.
Yeah, exactly. They've taken it even further, and that's amazing for sure.
Yeah. And I think the big reason why is because the gatekeepers changed. So the editorial staff,
the editors,
they started hiring people of color, a lot more women. And that changes the dynamic of the office, changes the dynamic of the editorial board. And this is what we get. We get more of a diverse lineup of books and people taking chances. Because at one point it was just a bunch of 40-year-old men making all the choices. And, God bless them, but there's only so much they can do for other people, right?
Yeah.
They try.
Some of those people had all the best intentions and interests, and they wrote political stories and they encouraged politics in comics. But then you had a bunch of other ones who were just interested in fights and costumes.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And it's a generational shift as well, right? Because, I mean, at one point, every single Archie comic was written and drawn by some 40-year-old white guy, which never made sense to me as a former 40-year-old white guy. 40-year-old guy.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Sorry. Secrets. And now there are more women and younger women writing about these young women mostly, and young women's experiences, which anyway. So Biocomics, Jen Haines, I thought you were gonna say something there. I cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about Jerry Craft's New Kid. It's an absolutely incredible book that just like gave me all the feels and made me laugh out loud so many times. It's great. For the like YA/older teen market, Fights by Joel Christian Gill is an absolutely amazing book about his personal experience growing up. It definitely has some more grown-up content in it, so just be warned. But it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable story. Press? And it's Line Forge Oni. It moved me so much, that story, that it's just like stuck with me. And it's one of those books that you just like always go, yeah, that's an amazing book. Yeah. So
very cool. So I see that we are coming up on the end of our time here. Do you guys have any closing words, parting words, anything you want to push or promote before we sign off here? Maybe we'll start with Jen Storm.
I don't know. I guess I just want to say thanks for having me. I'm glad that I was able to partake. I mean, that's the one good thing about like COVID is that now these things are done on Zoom and I could just come downstairs and join you.
Right.
I didn't have to fly to Toronto this time.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's nice. Yeah,
but I mean, thank you again for filling in for David. This it was very last minute, and I was in a bit of a like, oh no, what are we gonna do? And
David got it.
Awesome.
He called me up first night, so yeah, that's all. I don't want to plug anything.
I'm just pushing Chunky. Yeah, definitely go buy Chunky, June 22nd. mychunky.com will take you to links to wherever to buy it. And then also, I am a showrunner on a narrative podcast for kids.
Oh, right. I forgot to mention
Hero Hotel, which I'm very proud of. And it's a narrative podcast on the Pinna Network, PINNA, Pinna Audio. And yeah, it's very funny.
Jen Haines, you got any gigs coming up that we can go
No.
see, listen
Oh
to?
man, I wish. I can't wait to be able to like actually sing and sing around again and like do
Hey,
all
we've
that.
got a couple minutes.
No.
Yeah.
See, I'm part of
counter
like a group.
down.
You can't just be the bass and sing. You have to sing with the other parts. It doesn't work.
We can try. Just assign parts and we'll try. Okay, I guess that's a no.
Thank you so much for having me on the panel. I really do appreciate coming and talking about this and you know, signaling that, like, reassuring people that yes, a shift is happening, and we just need to keep like leaning into that shift and helping make these books successful so that it keeps going, and more kids will be able to come in and see themselves in books, because that is just so fundamental to helping people develop who they are and develop that like confidence and assurance in themselves. So
yeah. And I would say for retailers, like, make the front entrance of all your shops kid friendly. Like, you want to invest in the kids because you're going to get them early and then they're going to come back and buy whatever books you got. But like, make sure the front is like kid friendly, feel comfortable like sitting and reading any book. Like, dude,
you should check out the Dragon if you're ever up here. Like, it looks like the most inviting space for kids.
Nice.
I mean, I would probably just sit there all day if I could and read in color. Although Jen would probably not like that. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. Jen, I couldn't have said it better myself. You guys were great. I hope the people who are watching us learned a thing or two, maybe picked up a new title to go check out. And I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jen Storm. Thanks, Jen Haines, Yehudi Mercado, and Jay Torres. We're honored to have you share your stories and your amazing work with us. There's just so much value in the stories you put out, and how you center the characters to take on complex decisions in everyday life. So thank you for that. Great stuff. TCAF is brought to you in part by Seneca College School of Creative Arts and Animation. Special thanks to the Beguiling Books and Art page and panel, the TCAF shop, with government support from Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and Toronto Arts Council. Also, check out our online marketplace to get your hands on all the wonderful comics and art from our amazing lineup of creators. Looking for your favorite artists, we have a pretty rad list of exhibitors to navigate on our website. It's just in the chats. Thanks, everyone, and happy TCAF.